Phenomenon man who seems to be wise in this world, let him become a fool that he may be wise, Saint Paul said. I am Valery Fadeev, and this is my series Transforming Humanism on Overcoming the Global Political and Cultural Crisis. Climate change is now on the top of the global agenda. Climate is considered at huge forums. It is discussed by G7 and G20. Solar and wind power are promoted. Fines for carbon emissions are introduced. Across the board, the automotive industry switches to manufacturing electric cars, and so on and so forth. Truth be told, though a cynical market repartitioning or squeezing subside from the state can be often discerned lurking behind those statements and actions. If we agree with the hypothesis that global warming is anthropogenic, and it is precisely just a hypothesis, even so many lean toward it, then the question arises as to who specifically is to blame for rampantly spiking emissions. The obvious answer is that it is the fault of businesses, primarily of industrial and agrarian companies, but it would be wrong to lay the blame solely at the door of business. The modern sociologist Michael Mann writes that the climate problem was begotten by capitalism, with both nation-states and individual consumers aiding and abetting. Unfortunately, there are the three crucial actors of today. Therefore, to avoid a planet-wide disaster where power needs to be reined in, which is in itself a very difficult task. For consumers, the climate problem is too abstract a matter. They happily discuss this subject, and people in wealthy countries with high consumption levels are particularly fond of engaging in such conversations. Yet, are we ready to consume less to reduce emissions? And businesses, with their desire to increase their income and profits, are businesses ready to reduce production in full knowledge that it will shrink their profits? The problem is that even if some business will want to start handling these problems on its own, it will fail in its endeavor. If it decides to start reducing its emissions, it will have to spend more on production, and it will destroy its competitive edge, which will ultimately bankrupt it. Today, the business environment itself stands in the way of reducing harmful emissions. Finally, politicians do not dare tell their voters, i.e. consumers, that the goal of reducing harmful emissions requires that they reduce their consumption level. Therefore, consumerist ideology, businesses geared toward making profits and short electoral cycles in democratic states form a tight knot that is virtually impossible to untangle. Things are being made worse by rich countries accounting for the lion's share of emissions. However, dialogue with poor countries is impeded, since for this dialogue to be honest and substantive, rich countries will have to admit that the global division of labor is unfair. Many people also point out that the GDP, gross domestic product, as a classical economic indicator, is no longer adequate. Yet it is the indicator that politicians, businesses, voters and consumers alike take guidance from. The general belief is that the GDP needs to continuously grow. A question then begs to be asked: does continuous GDP growth mean that households' prosperity will also increase? Because economic policy should be focused on households, on specific people in a given household, and not on some formal indicator. It appears that the economic indicators will have to be revised under the new circumstances to reflect the achievement of goals faced by humanity and by specific states. This is a ZIL refrigerator, a famous Soviet brand, and this fridge still works. We are at the props department at the Mosfilm movie studio. It has many fridges, washers, mostly Soviet-made, and almost all of them still work. What is there in a fridge that could break down? A fridge is a rather simple device, a rather simple machine. If it is well made, it will work for many decades, like this specific ZIL Moskva fridge. Today's fridges, though, break down rather fast. Today's fridges work for 5–10 years top, and then they need to be replaced. What is the problem? And now we will talk about cars. This is a Volga. This specific car was used in the famous film "Watch Out for the Automobile".
Подвезти? Нам не по пути. Как хотите. Really?
Back then the idea was to make solid, long-lasting, reliable cars, good metal, good primer, good painting. People could repair their cars themselves, which certainly was cheaper than today's repairs in specialized garages. Today, well-off and more or less prosperous families prefer to change cars frequently. If they can afford it, they buy a new car every 5 or even 3 years. Some families have several cars. Automotive companies cater to their consumers by offering new models once in those same 5 years. Those are allegedly new models, but frequently this is imitation novelty. Another problem is that today's cars are far less reliable than old cars. They have a lifespan of 5 years. After that, cars begin to break down and maintenance becomes prohibitively expensive. We have a symbiosis between consumers who want new cars and manufacturers who try to squeeze increasingly higher profits from increasingly higher sales. This symbiosis results in overconsumption of resource, energy, metal, plastics, rubber, which in turn results in increasingly greater emissions into the environment. In the meantime, we can use today's technologies to manufacture cars that will run for 30 years and 1,000,000 kilometers. Such cars will be about 30% more expensive, while this price hike will be easily offset by their longer service life. Two questions beg to be asked. How do we distract consumers from consumer frenzy? Once a person buys such a car, it will last then virtually their entire life. And the second question, a more difficult one. Profitability in the automotive industry is low as things stand. If manufacturers make far fewer cars, what will happen to their profits? And what will happen to household prosperity? Will be deteriorate? No, it is likely to improve since a given household will spend less on cars or fridges and will be able to spend that money on something else. What will happen to the GDP? Most likely it will drop since car manufacturers will be making fewer cars and the economists will have their work carried out for them. How do we reduce consumption without losing our quality of life? Can we do it without restricting people's rights? How should we transform our economic system with that goal in mind without losing entrepreneurial incentives? And this is the only way to overcome financial capital's resistance. Finally, what will happen to employment in those sectors that will have switched to this economic mode? If employment falls, what do they offer the newly unemployed people? So far, only one thing is clear: the vicious consumerist circle needs to be broken. The outstanding Russian and Soviet scientist Nikita Moiseev proceeded from a planet-wide global perspective on the environment. He believed that the age, which started approximately 12,000 years ago with the discovery of land tilling and livestock breeding, is drawing to a close. Moiseev wrote, "Today we live within the civilizational paradigm that dates back to that time, but our needs are continuously growing while we preserve our original view of nature as an inexhaustible reservoir that makes it possible to meet all those needs." Moiseev believed that humanity will either degenerate or pull itself together to change their very own social nature. The environmental crisis cannot be resolved in any other way. In Peter Sorokin's words, humanity should design a new social-cultural system. Apparently, it will be impossible to handle the environmental task with purely technical steps such as raising taxes on emissions and stimulating green economy. People's way of life will have to be changed. Consumption will have to be reduced in such a way as not to affect quality of life, in such a way as not to make people poorer. Another problem is the task of cutting down on consumption is primarily faced by wealthy countries that are used to a very high quality of life and do not wish to assume the cost of handling environmental problems. Once again, as I've said before, the solution does not lie in technocratic decisions. The solution lies in the realm of values. Once again, we should handle the task in a value-rational manner. We need a new methodology, new approaches to handling the environmental problem. Wallerstein said very important things, yet other things are important too. Russia has preserved the foundations for a culture of the integrated type. Russia has a certain duality of being Europe and non-Europe, community-minded and individualistic, of seeing the state as a service and as a sacred institution. Suggestions have often been voiced to put an end to this quality. Yet I believe that putting an end to this duality would mean putting an end to Russia itself. Our country has been going on like that for centuries. This duality is not a drawback. This is Russia's huge, unique, competitive edge. Russia's two-headed imperial eagle looks both west and east, and this is traditionally believed to be a symbol of the country that stretches across half of Eurasia. Yet the Russian eagle does not look only west and east, it is also looking into the future and into the past. Russia internalized that Peter Sorokin termed sensate culture. The Russian state is a state of modernity, technology, art, yet Russia continues to bear within it the ideational super-sensate culture. This is Russia's great duality. It is not only the West and the East, it is a great continuity of ages. Today the world is at a turning point. There is need for intellectual advantages, for mind and spirit that would allow humanity to create a new project, and the country that creates it will take the lead, and its people will gain meaning and happiness.